Hey Stuart, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. How we doing? This is
Good,
the
good.
iPhone experiment because I've attempted to diagnose this keyboard and then realized I should really dial in.
No worries at all. I do want to just ask your permission to record this session primarily so that Sarah can play it back, so that we've got something on file for briefing returning officers in the future so that we can do documentation. Totally understand if you prefer it not to be recorded as well.
No, let's go record it and we can have note the fact that I'm using a screwdriver just to not leave random screws around the house.
I will extra nerd points for you and extra points for you today as well. Excellent t-shirt, excellent conference. Was 25.
Yeah, it's a nice cool shirt actually, like literally, because near enough by to know the weather.
And that's exactly why Sarah designed the t-shirts in that fabric, because we knew Ballarat would be hot, and to make everyone as cool as possible. No worries. So I'm going to share my screen.
Cool.
And let's see if I can find the right. So
Started sharing. Pinch out from here. Let's see if I can rotate the magic phone.
No worries. Lovely. So just to start with some context,
Yeah.
This year we completely redeveloped the Linux Australia website, which used to sit on Drupal. The membership system, as you know, because you wrote it, was was standalone in PHP, so they didn't connect. What we've done with the membership system, for various reasons, we've chosen to go with CiviCRM on top of WordPress, primarily because there's more WordPress skills within the people who are keeping the website up to date than Drupal. And CiviCRM because it's the best of breed open source membership system. The downside with CiviCRM is that it didn't have an elections module. So we contracted Agileware, who are our supplier for the website and CiviCRM implementation, to build a custom election module, like for like with membership DB. The code for that is completely open source, so it's licensed under AGPL3. So from a returning officer perspective, that election code is completely open source and inspectable, and the algorithm should be completely transparent from an assurance point of view. What we do to create an election, I'm going to create an election but not publish it, so that I can show you the process for it, and that will also make sense as I show you the database structure and database data as well, which we're very happy to provide access to. So to create an election,
I'm going to sneakily git clone at the same time, if that's good. What was the URL there again for the
it
GitHub
is
Agileware something?
Elections. The only concern I've got, can I chat while I'm sharing screen? I can, bear with me.
I found it on GitHub.
Yep. So the only concern I have is that the elections module is a module within CiviCRM, so you'd be able to inspect the code, but you may not be able to spin it up unless you also spun up something that was running CiviCRM as well. So it's
fair enough.
But you should be able to get to the code. So what I'll do is take you through creating an election. So very similar to how MemberDB does an election. We give the election a name. Kathy's done the election for returning officer briefing.
To be fair, it's a lot prettier than MemberDB ever was.
To be fair to you, MemberDB was 10 years old. You know, there wasn't such a thing as CSS when it was built. You know, so
CSS was was just becoming a thing. It was built in the early 2000s, and by that I mean we used it in 2003, and I'd written it about a year or two prior. I believe there was a port to PHP 4.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Those were the days. You know, layouts, tables. So we set a visibility range for the election. I will see if I can do this. And what I've done is set the end date of the visibility well into the future, so that previous elections are visible in future years. We set the range of dates when voters can submit nominations, and there are business rules built into the election that you can't advertise candidates until nominations are closed. And then you only do voting after the candidates are advertised, and results can only be shown after voting closes. So they're mutually exclusive date ranges is what I'm trying to say. So this takes a fair bit of setup. You have to be very specific about the dates. I won't put them in because it's just too hard to calculate the dates. You can choose how many nominations you have for the election. I'll go in and show you the settings for the current elections so that you can, you know, be, and what I'll try and do is give you access to this so that you can inspect as well. We've set it so that there are 2 required nominations, and a self-nomination counts as a nomination as well. So it's exactly the logic for MemberDB. Groups in CiviCRM are slightly different. So the only people who are allowed to vote in the election and nominate are members, current members. This is why we had to do all of the getting everybody listed as a current member business, which triggered all the emails. Otherwise, they wouldn't be allowed to vote in the election. So, for instance, let's say that we changed our membership in the future, and what the thinking that's behind this system is that if Linux Australia in the future changes its constitution or membership type or anything like that, this system should allow Linux Australia to change how it operates, and we just change the settings in the system. So I'm anticipating that this is a system that Linux Australia will have for about 10 years before you have to do any major changes.
Oh, that's fair. I thought MemberDB would last for, you know, a couple of years or something. What was it? 15 something. So yeah.
Phenomenal. But this is also, let's say that we wanted to facilitate an election for a subcommittee, for instance, say Linux Users Vic. We could add all of the members of Linux Users Vic into a group in CiviCRM and only allow that group to vote in an election. So it gives us quite a lot more flexibility than having to create a new instance of MemberDB, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or create a new organisation within MemberDB. Also very useful for, let's say that, I can't think of a use case where we might want only a very small number of members to vote, but it may be that council wants to do, you know, voting on things this way. Probably not, but you could facilitate it using this as well. You can also select whether or not the members of that group can change their votes. And you can also anonymise votes. So, for instance, if we anonymise votes, it will give you a count in the results, but it won't tell you who voted for what, which is basically anonymous voting that we've implemented in MemberDB. The who voted for what is still available in the database, so we still have an audit trail. But if we wanted to, let's say there's an incredibly contentious vote and we wanted a recount, we could say we're not going to anonymise voting because we, you know, it's contentious or what have you, and we can make it visible voting. So that's how we set up an election. I won't create one now because it's a real pain to create an election. But what
Yeah, I
what
remember that.
happens? Basically, let's say that we have people can nominate, so they nominate using the interface when they log into CiviCRM in the member area, and then once they nominate, they can be seconded, and then they have to accept the nomination. So this is one thing that as a returning officer, you need to be aware of. This year we had several people who nominated and were seconded, but didn't accept their nomination.
Yeah.
So I didn't take a screenshot at the time, but we had several extra people who nominated for ordinary committee member, but they didn't accept their nomination. So very similar to MemberDB, it implements exactly the same logic. We've tried to make it as like for like as possible. So be aware that they didn't accept their nomination. So once a nominee has 2 nominations, they are then able to accept their nomination, and they can create a spiel for themselves, their candidate spiel. So we also have a bug with that at the moment. We can see that Sarah's got her spiel there. It shows who she was nominated by. But for other people who had a spiel, the spiel isn't showing, and we don't know why.
Okay.
I don't think this is of any consequence this year because we have no contention in the positions. We have less nominations than positions, so it's a non-issue this year. But I have an action item to log this with Agileware. We know that the issue is with a template in because CiviCRM uses Smarty templating TPL files. We know that it's an issue with the logic in the templating file. We just haven't diagnosed it yet.
Okay.
But there is an outstanding bug there that as returning officer you need to be aware of. And I come from the perspective of I'd rather show you everything under the hood so that you have a good sense of no one trying to pull wool over anyone's eyes. These are things you need to know as a returning officer from an assurance point of view. The first couple of days of the election, we also had a bug where, so I'll just turn off Mycroft. We also had a bug where if you went to second somebody and you clicked on the second button, it wouldn't bring up their name properly, but that was fixed within 24 hours of us noticing the bug. So there's that. So I've covered nominations. People have to accept their nomination. People can also withdraw their nomination. So for instance, I was nominated and seconded, but I withdrew my nomination, for reasons that are public. And so I didn't appear as a candidate. So once somebody withdraws their nomination, they're no longer shown as a candidate. And they get a different status in the database, and that's auditable as well. So now we're in the period of the election where people can vote, and we've allowed recast of votes for people, and it does a complete atomic remove and replace. Again, it's completely non-consequential this year because we have no contested positions, but that's how it works at a database level. So basically to vote now, people click the vote now button, and it's preferential voting just like MemberDB. You can number the boxes. Extra piece of information, the avatars for the members, because CiviCRM is based on top of WordPress, the avatars are coming from Gravatar. So that's where those avatars are coming from. And it's coming from the email address that's associated with the Gravatar account that the person has with their Linux Australia membership.
Cool.
So preferential voting, just like MemberDB. And when you hit vote, your existing votes will be replaced. We have another gap at this point in the process, and that's that we don't have email set up when a vote occurs. So with the old system, if you voted as a member, you would get an email to say you have voted, and the secretary would get an email to say person blah has voted, so that if we needed to, we could do a backtrack that way. We can set up notifications, and I've got it as an action item, but I haven't got to it yet. So it's my bad just not getting to my action items. I'm not sure whether I should turn on notifications halfway through an election, but it would probably be a good idea, I think, to do it so that we can shake out any email sending issues with the election now. When we've got an election where there's where it's a no contest, no positions are contested. So that's where we are with voting. When voting closes, we'll be able to see the results. I think I've set the results for 7:30 or 7:30 for a time around about when the AGM occurs. In order to change the time, so the voting closes at midnight or 11:59 p.m. on the Sunday. And then the results are available on the Monday, which gives us that Monday to do any assurance or look at the database for results and satisfy ourselves that it's been a valid election. We can change the dates of the election. So if we want to make the results earlier or later, we can do that, but we have to deactivate the election first. And it's basically a lockout mechanism that allows us to lock out the election if we need to tweak or change anything. For instance, if we've set the voting to close on the wrong day, or we've got results coming out on the wrong day, depending on when the election is, on when the AGM is. So I don't want to deactivate the election at the moment, but basically it allows us to go back to that election settings screen and change things in the election settings, and then that's logged again in the database.
Okay.
So that's for position elections. There's a couple of questions that I'm not quite sure of in terms of how the election system handles the case where somebody might be nominated for 2 positions. The positions are given an order of precedence. So for instance, president is position 1, vice 2, secretary 3, treasurer 4. From memory, I think it does some sort of order base that if you are elected to a position that's higher in the order of precedence, you cannot be elected to a position lower in the order of precedence. But we didn't test for that in our testing. The case of that occurring is probably unlikely, given we struggle to get candidates, but it's something to be aware of.
We used to have that a bit more often, like in the 2000s. And yeah, I remember implementing that, and it was a giant pain in the ass. It's like, it turns out all the lovely election logic goes out the window when you put in all these bloody special cases. Otherwise, it would be one nice simple SQL query. That was very performant until you got the corner cases. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter now. It's probably unlikely to matter for a while, but yeah, it's something to test. Maybe I'll hold the room hostage and make everyone do QA while we're there.
Oh yes.
Wouldn't be the first time.
That is a great idea. I like that idea. Come to the AGM, stay for the QA. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, you can't get fed until you help us QA. Stuart, I'm not sure if you can still see or hear me. My internet connection is terrible. I'm just going to see if I can fail over to 4G. I'm just going to record again for part 2. Bear with me. Excellent. So I'm going to share my screen again.
Yeah.
And I think I got up to the part where I was saying I'm not sure how it handles the corner case where we have somebody who is successful in 2 positions. The positions do have an order of precedence and hierarchy, so that logic could be implemented without database level changes if we needed to. The runoff election occurs using a very similar algorithm to MemberDB, except the chance of ties is a lot less. That's a minor algorithm change from MemberDB, so it tries to avoid the case of a tie in the preferential runoff. I sincerely hope we get to the point where we have more preferential runoffs, so it would be a nice problem to have.
Well, do you want to know the algorithm of what MemberDB did in that case? It picked whichever one came from the database last. There was no logic about which preference it redistributed first if you had 2 bottom ones which were a tie. And it just so happened we were really lucky that never mattered, because the immediate next preference to redistribute was always that second person.
Gotcha.
So yeah, not having a solid solution there is definitely yes, a to-do, but one we've gotten away with for the past 14 years or something. So whatever year it is, 15, whatever.
we can always use jewels at 10 paces, you know, pistols at dawn.
Pretty much.
It would solve several leadership problems. Hypothetically. So that's probably all for the position elections. We have a constitutional election that's currently live at the moment so that we can vote on changes to the Constitution.
Yeah.
The way that this is being done, again, you know, complete openness and transparency. What I did with this was set up the election and set a very small window for nominations. Then what I've done is, and I set the number of nominations to 1, so it could be self-nominating. Then in the database, I have 2 members, one called no and one called yes. And for complete transparency, I'm going to see if I can show you how these accounts are set up. And I've also tagged them so that they're searchable, because I'm one of those people. So here in the database, we have 2 dummy records called no and yes. And our intent is that these dummy records would be used for voting in no or yes based elections. For instance, do we change our name to Open Source Australia? Yes, no. The way that the email is set up is that it's council plus no and council plus yes. Those emails both go to council, and that's been tested as well. So that's how we do that election. But there's been no member involvement, no member nomination up until this point. So the only involvement that members have is voting yes or no, and only members can vote in this election as well.
Yeah.
So that's how we've set up a constitutional election. The next thing that I wanted to walk you through was the database, which here's one I prepared earlier. So there are 2 databases involved with the website and membership system. WP is the WordPress content, don't need to be across that at all. CiviCRM is the one where the election
CiviCRM stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. And then all the tables relevant to the election are surprisingly named CiviCRM election. So although I have database right to this database. I can't give you any other guarantee other than myself and Agileware are the only people with right access to the database at the moment. But I can't give you any sort of auditable, traceable. We could probably go to IP logs if we needed to, but I haven't made any direct database rights. So you can see here that we have, this is all the data from that election screen. Each election
I don't
has a
know if my
unique...
camera is currently on, but sorry for the close-up of my eyeball if I'm squinting at my phone here.
Totally fine. It's a lovely eyeball.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that looks familiar. That looks rather like how we used to have with MemberDB and the layout. Yeah.
Well, this module has been entirely modelled on MemberDB. The supplier Agileware were given, excuse me, MemberDB as a reference, and I basically said if there are any gaps in my spec, default to what MemberDB does. So it was basically a like for like, primarily because we know that MemberDB has worked so well for us, and also because it has quite a bit of flexibility. What we're anticipating is that the voting module will be used by other not-for-profits as well as part of our contribution back to the open source commons.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So that's the election table. We then have election nomination. So there's a primary key there. The eligible candidate becomes Boolean true if there's a seconder, and then you can see whether they've accepted the nomination, and there's a has rejected nomination column as well. So this is the one if somebody is nominated and seconded but they withdraw their nomination. So I would be a good test case for that. We have the date stamp, and this is the member ID. So this references back to the contact ID of the member.
Yeah.
And I can't tell what this field is, but this is probably a link back to the unique
election position,
election position, so that there would be multiple rows in this table if you were nominated for multiple positions in an election. This table is the nomination seconder. It links back to nomination ID, which links back to election. So it's that sort of entity relationship. You'll see here lots of test entries. We ran 2 full test elections before we opened the real one, primarily because we weren't sure that it would work. But considering election position is the table that joins election and position. So this is where we're able to nominate both the name of the position and the sort order, so the hierarchy of the position. And you can see there that it looks, what you'd expect to see. You can have a position to have multiple seats. So for instance, we don't enter in the OCM position 3 times. We enter in the OCM position once and say there are 3 seats of that position. So for instance, let's say that we wanted to elect a board of governors and there was no hierarchy in the board of governors. We would have 1 position and maybe, 10 seats for the board of governors. And that's deliberately so that if we want to extend how many people are on council in the future, say take it from 7 to 9, well, that was a discussion at council a couple of years ago, primarily because we couldn't get enough done with 7 people. But I sort of said, no, I think that's the wrong way to go. You don't want to make council bigger, you want to give other people the ability to get things done. And that's how that's how the position and seats work.
Yep.
I don't know what this table is on the end.
Which one is that? I don't remember.
Result status for this position. So after all the nominations have closed and voting has started, there is a nomination result for positions. So for instance, you can have majority, where somebody needs to get a majority to hold that seat. You can have equal seats, where you have equal the number of nominations as you do for the seats. You can have more seats, where there are more seats available than nominations, and that's the issue that we have with the OCMs this year. We've got 2 nominations, 3 seats. You can have no nominations, which means there are no nominations for that seat at all. So that's what that column is doing. So it's fairly easy to, once you have the election ID, it's fairly easy to see what the resulting layout is of an election. Let me just go and find what our election ID is for this election. It's 5. Election equals 5. It hasn't given me the result status.
Or maybe that's updated at the end of the election by some chance, maybe. I don't know. Could be.
I thought it was updated when nominations closed. My bad. Sorry, I didn't mean to give you incorrect information there.
Yeah,
but the created by gives you like a foreign key reference to whoever created the election as well. So that's all auditable as well. So for instance, 3451 should be the President at Linux Australia account. I've got separate accounts in Civi CRM, one as president and one as Kathy Reid, normal member, primarily so that I do all my admin operations as president and any member operations as normal Kathy. So there's some separation there. Come on. So I don't know why it won't let me. Too many columns. But basically this should be the contact information for president@linux.org.au because it's a foreign key join. I won't bore you with that at the moment.
There's 400,000 columns that go off the end of the screen for a long
way. Actually, it probably is about 400,000 columns. Civi CRM is incredibly powerful. It's a beast to set up, and it's a beast to get into some normal operations with. But in terms of making our life easier, much better. Then we have Civi CRM election result. And this joins the election position ID with the election nomination ID and gives us the order of, or the rank of the nominee for a position. So this has no foreign key back to election. The foreign keys are all done in the election position and election nomination tables. They link back to election.
Yeah.
And basically this is just giving us the outcome preference, but it's another way to audit the results of the election. This is the election vote vote table. This is where the actual votes are recorded. Again, there's no foreign key reference back to election. The foreign key referencing is done via the election nomination table. So you vote for a nominee and you give them a rank, and then the foreign key reference back to election is through the election nomination table. The member ID is a foreign key reference to the contact, the CiviCRM contact field, the one that I just showed you. And again, it's only the people who are members in the group that's allowed to vote in the election. That logic is done using membership and group in CiviCRM. So that's auditable using that link as well. And that's pretty much it in terms of the election database. I haven't written any SQL that would be useful for a returning officer at all. I'm very happy to do that. And, you know, if you said, hey, Kathy, give me a report that joins these tables with the current election ID so that I can get an outcome, you know, I'm very happy to do that as well.
Okay, yeah, I've sort of gathered a little bit of poking of where that appears in the source for the election module too, and it looks like, you know, it wouldn't be too hard to have a quick look at that. I mean, it's not as critical for this election as it would be in, you know, our hopeful future where there's more candidates than there are positions. But
oh, it'd be a nice problem to have.
Yeah. But yeah, in this case, you know, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, and should be able to have a bit of a look and encourage others to do as well. It certainly looks like more modern PHP than I've ever written, but it's probably a good thing. Very much a good thing.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I needed to cover with you. So from my list here, I've got GitHub. So you've got the GitHub address for the source code, how elections are handled, permissions. Okay, so I need to run you through how permissions are handled. So at the moment, we have a group called Election Administrators. And you have to be in that group to be able to see the election tab in CiviCRM. And these are the only people with election